Today's episode is presented by Lodestar, the fee experts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Lodestar's Lending Leaders, the summer session.
Woo!
And this month, we are going to be talking about The Office. We're millennials, which obviously means we love The Office. And there's a lot of business lessons we think we can take away from that. So we're really excited to talk about them today. So in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about if we think Dunder Mifflin was a semi-successful company. And I think that's there's a lot there. So let's just dive into it.
Yeah. Well, I love this to start it. I'm excited. I've been pushing for this topic for a while, so I'm very excited that this is our summer series because I think the show just resonates so much. There's a reason why it's been so watched by not just our generation, but lots of other people. I actually taught English in a software company one summer when I was in China, and I would have an hour class by playing an episode of The Office. As it played, I would write every word and term to do with business on the wall and then spend the rest of the hour going over those. It's a great way to kill an hour lesson. It worked out really well. So,
Well, that's definitely helpful.
But is Dunder Mifflin a good company? It sure doesn't seem that way. I mean, especially with, competing against Office Depot, Xerox, of all of these very large, big paper companies. Right. It kind of, I think, shows that, okay, like we're selling a commodity, but people kind of like service, so they're going to buy from us because, they're dealing with a person.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely think there's a place for individual paper suppliers in the greater office world. I think it's getting a lot smaller than it used to be, for sure. And I think kind of what you see throughout the Office series is kind of this, like, this is a business that's dying, right? It's a concept that's dying, and like, I remember I used to be the person responsible for ordering all of the paper for my conference center, right? And I ordered it through the small company business, but at some point we switched to Staples because we would you can't say no to the savings. But I think the fact that Scranton has somehow stayed alive and stayed open for as long as they have is kind of impressive to me.
That's true. And I do feel like the show wouldn't have been as good if it was actually like a real successful business.
Yes.
Too, right. There's something about that mentality of the type of company it is that I think makes it more compelling as well. And I always like the fact like corporate was in New York and like seeing that regional structure and all of like the executives versus the local folks. So it's definitely, always really resonated with me seeing the type of way that company was set up.
Yeah. And I think there's a really good point during like the shareholder meeting that happens of like, you kind of just see how mismanaged this company was. I think actually, if they had maybe been a little bit more strategic with some of their budgets, realized everything was shrinking a little bit faster, adjusted for that, maybe you don't need the Center City, New York office, sort of thing. Like they might have been able to respond better. And, we kind of leave the show as Dunder Mifflin still exists as a company, but I feel pretty confident in saying that Dunder Mifflin probably went bankrupt years ago.
I mean, if they got through the Great Recession, they definitely did not get through the pandemic.
Yes.
There's a lot less paper being used, I think, during the pandemic. So that probably would be the case.
Yeah, we definitely, time of death, let's call it.
2020. And they're in these, non-big cities, right? Stanford, which is probably a little better off than Scranton. Forget where some of the other ones were, up in like Nashua, right? Like up in New Hampshire. So I think that's kind of part of it. But I think that's what also makes the show endearing.
Yeah, you kind of want them to win, right? Because they're just so localized and all of that. And I think there are times when you can see like their sales teams are doing well and during the show, and there are times the sales teams are doing terribly. And I think that's honestly makes it a much more realistic show than if like they were doing well or poorly the whole time, like because business is cyclical.
Well, and there are a lot of businesses like that, right? That they survive based off one big client, right? The hospital, or like one really large client, and really just the strength of those relationships. And like there are a lot of businesses that depend on that. And it's very tough to build a business that isn't like that. doing that for 10 years. Like the fact that you can, lose your biggest client and still be okay is not something that most businesses are able to say.
No, for sure.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think overall, I would say Dunder Mifflin was moderately successful. And I think honestly, just technology did them in, right? At the end of the day, they failed at launching a website. They didn't really ever seem to do online ordering. Let's be real, like ordering paper through a salesperson is probably not the most efficient. I don't want to call a salesperson every time I need 10 cases of paper. I'd rather order it online. But I'd say I think they were pretty successful for what they could have been.
Yeah, fair.
So what would you say? Successful or not successful?
Middling. There definitely seemed was a point in time they were doing well and they just didn't, innovate with the times.
Yeah. Well, these are micro episodes for our summer session. So next week we're going to talk about who we would hire and who we would fire from The Office. I think there's a lot there. There's a lot of people. So we're going to go through the cast and tell you if we think they would be part of our team. So
great.
Awesome.
I have lots of feelings about it.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see everyone next week. And thank you so much for tuning in to Lodestar's summer session.
Thanks all.
Thank you for listening to the Lodestar's Lending Leaders podcast. Please like, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars anywhere you get your podcast. A special thank you to the Lodestar podcast production team, Jim Paolino, Tim Austin, and John Gardner.